good evening. We are so glad that you have joined us tonight for our webcast that we've entitled Caring Well During a New Diagnosis. We hope that you will find our time together this evening really encouraging. I'm looking forward to introducing these panelists to you just shortly. And before we get started and before I introduce our content and them tonight, I want to tell you just briefly about engaging disability with the gospel. For those of you who are new to us or who maybe haven't interacted or engaged with us, we really want you to know that that's the purpose of these webcasts, is to start those relationships and conversations with you. Engaging Disability with the Gospel has been around since 2007. It's been a ministry of Mission to North America since 2007, and we serve approximately 1,900 PCA churches, their families and individuals who are impacted by disability all across North America. And we also serve other churches that reach out and want to connect with us, not just within the PCA. So we welcome you wherever you are tuning in from tonight, and hope that you will find, again, this content encouraging and want to start a conversation. Just a tiny word here. Our goals in engaging disability are that our kids, teens, and adults who are impacted by disability would not just be present in our churches, but would be thriving. And so by thriving, we really are wanting to talk about that piece of how do we grow in Christ? How do we unfold into the congregation? How do we establish those meaningful relationships? And a lot of times accommodations are needed. And that's the piece that we think on day in and day out in this ministry. So please reach out if you're a family or if you're a church and you're interested in trying to figure out how you can not just be present, but can actually grow in your walk with the Lord and thrive in the context of your congregation. That's what we're here for. We will drop a few links for you if you want to visit our website to see more about our consults, our online trainings, our in-person trainings, our leader meetings, our free resources, our online store. You can find all of that at engagingdisability.org. And if you are interested in reaching out and connecting with us directly, you can also do that at connect@engagingdisability.org. Just send us an email and we will be happy to get started in a conversation. Okay, so tonight it is my great privilege to introduce these panelists to you. They are dear friends as well as fellow moms who have children who are impacted by disability. And I am so excited for them to get to share a little bit about their lives. And I've really asked them to reflect on the past, which will come out as we get going. So what I'm going to do here is just briefly tell you, we have Amanda Yu. Amanda is from Trinity Park Church in Morrisville, North Carolina. We have Susie Lovekamp, and she is a member at First Presbyterian Church in Augusta, Georgia. And we have Rachel Unglesby, who is from Christ Community Church in St. Francisville, Louisiana. Rachel is, a quick plug, our graphic designer for our children's catechism flashcards and visuals. If you haven't checked these out, please go to our website, go to our store, you'll find them there. She's the mastermind behind bringing to life a lot of those concepts that we have both tossed around for years. So we're delighted to have her part of this, and also just wanted you to know that's who the Rachel is. Okay, so as we get started, I want to give you a quick overview of our goals. I'm really glad you're here, and I wanted to share at the outset that we are going to be focusing particularly on diagnoses within the young family. So I realize our audience tonight may be a combination of young families. It may be that there are some adults that are tuning in who have experienced adult onset disability. I want to encourage you that if you are in a different season and are navigating a new diagnosis, maybe dementia or adult onset, maybe a youth diagnosis, I really think you will find a lot of the principles that they share and that we connect the dots on to be equally helpful across seasons of life. But one of my main goals in this particular webinar was to give our panel, or our viewers, a little glimpse into what those early days and maybe even the year after an initial diagnosis in a young family looks like. What are the things that you wish you knew so that you could form those relationships, make them stronger with people in your church? If we have family that are joining us tonight who are navigating a new disability, I hope you'll find kindred spirits among what these ladies share and know that you're not alone, that we have all been there, myself included, and we would love to connect with you and encourage you. And we hope that what we share tonight will encourage you. I also want to remind you that these ladies are reflecting back on their experiences. And so that was intentional. I really wanted to invite guests on here who had navigated through multiple seasons of disability so that they had that perspective on what do you wish you had done differently, or what do you wish you had shared, or what do you wish you had known or could have reached out and asked for help in certain ways. And some of that just comes from perspective on looking back. So I did that intentionally, but I do again hope that you will find these ladies super encouraging. So my goals, we're going to look at what it was like to navigate those early days of disability. We're going to look at those common themes. We're going to look at what young families need from their friends, church, and family in order to be loved well during this unique season. And I also am going to attempt to answer your questions at the end, and potentially even as we go if they relate. So I want to encourage you, if you're watching, drop us questions in the Q&A if you're on the Zoom view of this webcast. And if you're watching via Facebook Live, drop your questions in the comments and we will be sure to try to answer those at the end. Okay, on to our panelists. Panelists, I really want to start by having you guys briefly share your story. For those watching, I'm going to ask them a lot more of the smaller detail questions throughout the conversation tonight. So for right now, I want you to give a brief introduction to you, your families, tell us about especially the particular disability diagnosis that has impacted your families. And we're going to start with Rachel.
I'm Rachel Unglesby. I'm married to Trey, and we have 3 kids. Our oldest, Emma Kate, is 13, and she is our one with special needs. And then we have 2 typically developing boys, ages 9 and 7, Luke and Thomas. So Emma Kate was diagnosed when she was about 2.5 with something called 2q37 deletion syndrome, which is a micro deletion on her number 2 chromosome, and super, super rare. She was one of 90 in the whole world with this diagnosis when she was 2.5. I think it's a little more common now. But just as an overview, she is completely nonverbal. She has a feeding tube. She's completely fed by her feeding tube. She can walk, but she uses a wheelchair for safety. She is completely diaper dependent. So 13 now, she's in 5th grade. And if you saw her, she looks like she's about 5 or 6. But sweet little thing. We love her.
Thanks, Rachel. Emma Kate is adorable. And I look forward to you guys getting to hear more about them in the next few sections of our questions. Amanda, how about you? Share briefly about your family. Amanda, we're going to get you. Yep.
We're a family of 4, and we have 2 boys. The first one is 7, and the second one is 4. And they both actually have birthdays coming up. But my oldest, Anderson, he is in 2nd grade, and he has a diagnosis of autism. Our second is Jackson. My husband is an assistant pastor at Trinity Park, and I'm at home full-time with our boys. We're a blended family. My husband is Chinese from Malaysia, and I'm from Mississippi, and we have a wonderful church family that's also blended and colorful and all the things, and they've been very supportive of us through this experience, and we've been with them from diagnosis onwards, so they've just been great.
Perfect. Thank you. And thanks so much for being here tonight to share with us. And Susie?
I'm Susie, and I am married to Joe, and we have been married for 17 years. We have 3 children. Noah is 15, and Madeline is 13, and Sadie is 12. And about 7 years ago, we started a ministry at our church, a disability ministry. And I have been leading that ministry for the past 3 years. And Sadie, our youngest, was diagnosed with Rett syndrome when she was 5 years old. Rett is a very rare neurological disorder. It mainly affects girls. It's rarely seen in boys. And it usually the girls develop normally, and then they begin to regress about 6 to 18 months of age. And usually they lose their ability to walk and talk and have purposeful use of their hands. But Sadie is still able to walk, which is a great delight to us. And she is not able to talk. Really, she just is kind of trapped in this body that doesn't allow her to do the things she wants to do. She understands and is with us and wants to do certain things, but just her body doesn't really allow her to do those things.
Perfect. One of the goals that I had for choosing panelists to come on tonight was different ages of children and different diagnoses or different disabilities or different diagnosis types. So I think one of the interesting things you're going to hear is how many similarities there are as they each share across what life was like as they navigated these early days. But I also think it's helpful for our viewers to realize you have some great options to connect here with parents of preteens and teens, and also one who is in elementary school. And that all of this, as we get to this next question, is going to talk about when we started noticing differences and to realize how early on these moms can reflect on that. So next question for you guys is the place I really want to start is for you to reflect back on that path leading up to the diagnosis. So at what point did you begin to suspect or know that maybe things weren't typically developing with your child? And maybe a little bit about, from a mom perspective, how you guys processed that awareness that there were differences and then getting to the place where you were ready to see what diagnosis there might be. I'm going to start with Amanda on this question.
So Anderson was evaluated in Pennsylvania, where we lived at the time, by the early intervention department at 18 months. But I was pretty blind to any concerns at the time. But when he was evaluated, the questions they were asking, and then the fact that he was kind of on the border of not being in the zone that would lead to services, I was just in a place where I assumed I wasn't teaching him or I wasn't parenting well, that I was, failing in those ways. And for some reason, him having a diagnosis wasn't even on my radar. But then when he was 2, he was evaluated in North Carolina. And one of the professionals who was a part of that evaluation said something very life-giving to me. And she explained that the questions they're asking, the things they're looking at are things that typically naturally develop. You don't have to, specifically teach these things. And that was very helpful for my heart. And it also started, leading me down the path that there is something else at play. And so we discovered through that there were definitely sensory needs, and he was soon 3, so he was aging out of early intervention, and the next natural step was to go to the public schools, and we did that. And when we did, they asked if they could do an autism evaluation, and I was like, sure. And so since they asked that, and the evaluation was for that, it started to be on my radar. So I was never scared of having a child with special needs, but when this came along, I was fearful of the idea of autism because of I'd seen a friend's blog post about her son and just some specifics of aggression, and Anderson was already starting to show aggression, and so I was just fearful of that specifically. But so that was both feeling what I was dealing with leading up to finding the news and afterwards as well. But my husband was in more of a place of just, knowing there's something going on and just want to know what that something is, and was glad to know that. So that's kind of like where we were in that season.
Perfect. And I'm going to add a few thoughts to Amanda's after Susie goes. Susie, tell us a little bit about how you guys navigated.
So Sadie was right on time with her development at her first birthday, but after her first birthday, she didn't start walking and she wasn't really talking. She had maybe about 50 words as we kind of crossed over into that after the first year. But I knew it was different than my other two because they kind of hit all their milestones right on time. So, but I still kind of thought, kind of like Amanda, I mean, I just thought, oh, she's the third child. I didn't read to her enough. Like, surely I've done something, or I don't know. I wasn't, it's like I kind of knew maybe something, but I still wasn't quite sure at that point. But as she hit her second birthday, more and more problems just started to develop with just her development. She wasn't hitting her developmental milestones at the time. And she started having seizures and sleep night terrors at night and just inconsolable crying spells that we were not able to console her. And so it just, we definitely at that point knew something was wrong. We just didn't know what was wrong. And so this kind of propelled us onto a journey for the next 3 years of pursuing doctors, traveling to well-known hospitals, searching for answers, and doing all these tests. And none of the doctors could figure out what was wrong with Sadie. And that was really hard to process. Just knowing something was wrong, but not being able to have the answer was hard. And then for her to be such a mystery to all the doctors, where we thought, they're the ones that should know what's going on. And I think that added just even more stress to the situation. So we just kept kind of forging ahead, and we would just kind of do the next thing. We would do the next IUP, do the next therapy appointment, do the next doctor appointment. And we did a lot of waiting. The waiting was really difficult. And so I think in that process, just really, I would beg the Lord to just give us an answer and just let us know what was going on. And we finally got the answer 2 months after her 5th birthday. And I was in car line. I will never forget it. I was picking up my other 2 children, and we got a phone call that she had, her results had come back positive for Rett syndrome.
Thanks so much for sharing. The reason I asked Amanda and Susie to go first, and I'm going to give a little bit of break here before I ask Rachel to share, is because the differences here are that Amanda and Susie did not know until after they had sweet babies in their arms that there were going to be differences. And so, if you are one of those parents, I know that you'll resonate with their story, how hard it is to first figure out what's going on and then get to the place where the Lord's at work in you enough to think maybe I should pursue a diagnosis. But also we're going to explore a little bit of some of these themes that they've talked about, where they doubted themselves or they thought they weren't teaching enough or doing enough, and then realized that it really wasn't, what mom was or wasn't doing. It was part of how God had made these little people. And so also, if you are walking alongside parents who are trying to figure this out, and think what Susie brings out is how long it can take to get a diagnosis. And we're going to talk about what happened after that in a few minutes. But being patient with parents, God's doing a lot of work in them as they are trying to love well within their family, and also sorting through all the emotions. And a lot of times it takes a while to be able to really get to the place where you more or less know by diagnosis what you are needing to do next. That may not always mean the steps fall into place. But Rachel's a little different because Rachel, I want you to share your story. So Rachel learned of Emma Kate's differences before she was born. So Rachel, will you share your story with us?
So Emma Kate was our first, and so I had never been a mom before, and so I think there was a lot of fear already. Just new mom, I was a young mom, and so we naively went for our 20-week ultrasound to find out the sex of the baby, and it was in that ultrasound that I started realizing that something was probably wrong, because it just kept going and going and going, and they were bringing in other nurses and other doctors, and then they moved us to a new room with bigger monitors and more monitors, and what should have been real quick ended up being like an hour-long ultrasound that was very quiet and very scary. And they don't tell you a whole lot in the ultrasound room. They kind of wait until you can talk to the doctor. But they told me at that 20-week ultrasound that what they saw was an issue with her kidneys, that her kidneys were enlarged. And so they decided that they would send me to maternal fetal medicine. And that was about 2 weeks later. And so I was careful not to Google anything that they had told me, because I was just so worried about what I would find, because they had mentioned a little bit that these enlarged kidneys could kind of be markers for other areas. And so I never Googled, and my husband had just taken a new job. And so I decided that I would be fine to go to the maternal fetal medicine doctor by myself 2 weeks later. And so I did. And the night before I went, I finally Googled and realized that this kidney issue was a marker for Down syndrome. So never told my husband, just went to the appointment, just thought everything's going to be fine. And I went, and it was devastating. The doctor that I saw was not kind at all, not gentle with me at all, just real blunt about what he saw, and kind of fussed at me for not having the genetic testing early on. And so he told me that day that he saw several markers for Down syndrome. And he encouraged me to do an amniocentesis that day. And so I did. It was terrifying being there by myself, huge needle, going into my belly that I was watching the whole thing on the ultrasound. And I just thought, if she does have Down syndrome, I just would like to know, so that I will have the next 18 weeks or so to prepare for that. So I did that, and then I went home and I waited for probably 2.5 weeks. And so we got the results from the amniocentesis, and she did not have Down syndrome. But that was kind of all we had, was that she didn't have Down syndrome, but she still had all these other things that they had seen. So I continued to see maternal fetal medicine throughout the rest of my pregnancy. And so once they kind of knew that she didn't have Down syndrome, they kind of started looking for other things. And what they noticed was that her arms and her legs were starting to measure shorter than her trunk. And as the pregnancy continued, that it continued to get bigger, like a bigger gap. And so they thought that she had some sort of skeletal dysplasia, like some sort of dwarfism. But again, they weren't sure. They never said this is definitely what it is. So I just spent the next 18 weeks just very afraid of what was to come. I didn't know what we were dealing with. Didn't know how to be a mom. I just was so afraid. I was so sad because I knew that she was probably going to have differences and problems. And I just didn't know how we were ever going to be able to handle that. So she was born, they induced me on her due date, and she was 4 pounds. I mean, just this itty bitty little baby that was totally full term. And I thought it was normal to have a ton of doctors in my room. I know now that that's not normal at all. But when she was born, she wasn't crying. It was very quiet. It was just very scary in that room. And finally, they got her to start breathing. She started crying. And at first, it seemed like, she was going to be okay to go to our room with us. But we quickly realized that she was not able to hold her temp. And she wasn't able to eat. And so she went from the step-down NICU unit, which is there's like the NICU unit and there's a step-down. She started in the step-down unit and then quickly went into the NICU. And that is where we were for about the next 6 weeks. During that time, they also found 3 issues with her heart. One that could be fixed in Baton Rouge in the hospital that she was born in, one that was major and was going to require open heart surgery in Boston. And so we realized that our only ticket out of the NICU was going to be a feeding tube because she just couldn't eat. So she had a little heart surgery in Baton Rouge. She got her feeding tube. We went home, and then we pretty much waited until we could go to Boston, until she was a little bit bigger and stronger. Went to Boston, had her open heart surgery, and all this time we still don't really know what's going on. We were doing the therapy. She wasn't meeting the milestones. In Boston, they told us she doesn't have skeletal dysplasia. All of her limbs are measuring, in her trunk, they're all measuring okay, and she doesn't have skeletal dysplasia. So it wasn't until she was about 2.5 that we finally got her diagnosis of 2q37 deletion syndrome. And I feel like, Susie, a little bit that she was this mystery that the doctors couldn't seem to figure out. So it was scary and confusing.
Perfect. One of the things that I think they'll continue to hit on this theme is the theme of waiting. There's a lot of waiting in the world of special needs. Even when as in Rachel's case, there's enough, but you still don't know a lot. And I think the learning to depend on the Lord during those times when you really don't know, and when your doctors really don't know, and you find yourself in that place of loving this little one, but really wanting to be the best mom and provide the best care that you can. And here these doctors or specialists who may not know all the answers. It's a hard place to be. And each of these panelists on their own, as they were preparing the scripts, have made comments about it's heavy to reflect back on those days because it was hard. We can smile and we can all sit here and nod our heads because we're however many years past that, and we know what God has done, and we know where our kids are, and we know what how He's worked in us and them, and how good it has been, even though it has been hard. But in those early days, that was not our perspective. So I just want to say that again as we go, because I know there may be parents out there watching who are feeling that place of I don't know, and sometimes it takes time, but the Lord is there with you. And I'm going to pull that out of these panelists in just a minute. I'm going to give a follow-up to Amanda and Susie on this one. Who was the first to notice the differences in your children? Maybe thinking that they were unique differences. Was it you or your husband? Oh, sorry. And I should tell you who's going first. I want Amanda to go first.
Honestly, I think we were both prompted by the professionals. In fact, both of the early intervention evaluations were prompted by kind of the Q&A from our pediatrician. So, yeah.
And so in your case, maybe it's others that nudged you guys along that path to getting there. Susie, what about y'all?
I think I did. I mean, I think looking back, I think it mainly was me.
And the reason I bring this up for the one word answer is because if you're following along and you feel like you are further ahead than your spouse, or it might be your husband who notices the differences. It might be you, and you're wondering, will we be on the same page when we start to pursue the next steps? It looks different in every family who God works in and through. Sometimes it's the people around you that nudge you to take the next step. Sometimes it's, like in Rachel's case, a medical appointment that alerts you to a difference. Sometimes it's either the husband or the wife, or could be an extended family member that God uses. So have confidence in how God is working in your family, and just know there's no one right way to know that there's a difference until you start that process of discussing and really letting the Lord lead to those next steps, which may look a little different than what we all have navigated. So then the follow-up to that is, what encouragement would you ladies give to viewers who are pondering whether their child has a unique difference and should they pursue a diagnosis? Susie?
I think just in your gut, when something is wrong or something is off. And so I would just encourage parents to just write down the things that they see that are different, or their concerns, and even just examples of, okay, when she does this, this is what happens. Because I found and take those and be persistent with the doctor. I feel like I was not heard, and I later found out that the doctor said, well, you just weren't, apparently I wasn't forceful enough or emotional enough, but I felt like I was saying the same thing, but it took just tears and desperation for them to finally hear me. So looking back, I think write it down and be persistent with your doctor.
Really good. Amanda, what about you?
Susie, that's brilliant. I like that. I would say just get them evaluated, adding on to what Susie said in terms of if you have any reservations or just feel, I would just encourage you to get them evaluated, because if you're at a place where it would be early intervention, they will step in even without a diagnosis. Just if there's a need that, and their scale is great enough, they're going to jump in and provide services. And it's always great to have help. And in terms of your child, it's always best to know ASAP. And I remember hearing that in the beginning. It's so good you caught it early. And honestly, at the time, I didn't put a lot of stock in that claim. In the beginning, yeah, I didn't. But, I've realized, like Ashley said, that just how true that is. Yeah.
Perfect. And I, again, will just reiterate the point that God works differently in each situation. I think pulling out, Rachel had a really hard doctor experience. And when you're coming alongside families, you don't necessarily know all these details. You don't know that Susie has felt like she hasn't been, emotional or strong or passionate enough in the doctor's offices to convince them. You haven't always seen the process that parents are going through to try to figure out what the differences are. And a lot of those things do inform our next steps and the ways that we respond to people that care for us and love us, things that we say in relationships, the way that we seek confidently the next professional and want them to help. And the reason I say all of that, again, is to encourage those wanting to love well. There's often a lot of things behind the scenes that we just don't know that cause families to do the things they're doing that make a lot of sense to them, but maybe don't always make sense on the outside looking in. And I think what you're going to hear is that all the details that come after the point of diagnosis are a lot overwhelming. And so we don't always take the time to pause and share all that we've been through in depth with every single person in our lives. And so it becomes challenging to keep people up on, who we really are and who we're becoming as we're becoming these parents of special needs kids. Rachel, I'm going to start with you on this next question. In those first months when you began to seek a diagnosis, and I guess for you guys, like really getting to the place where you found out 2q337 deletion syndrome, what was the most encouraging things that you remember other people saying to you? And then what would you maybe discourage someone from saying who's walking in a similar season?
So I can remember a few things that stood out to me. A lot of them were actually when I was still pregnant with her and we knew something was wrong, but we weren't sure what. As a new mom who had never had a baby before, I did have this fear, like, am I gonna love her like I'm supposed to? Like, is that in me to love her with all of these issues that I think she's gonna have? And I just had some friends that would encourage me by saying, y'all are going to love this baby exactly where she's at. And that was so true, but I didn't know it yet because I didn't have a baby yet. Mm-hmm. I can also remember some longtime friends calling when they got the news to just say, we want to be there for y'all. Mm-hmm. And that was so meaningful because I believed them because we had this long history. I didn't feel like they were going to be the ones to walk out on us, but I still needed to hear it. Like I needed people to say, we're in this with you for the long haul. I can also remember some people just tell me, it's okay to feel mad or sad. I mean, I can just remember feeling so angry in the hospital when I was about to be discharged without my baby, and it's just not how it was supposed to be. And I just remember my aunt saying, it is okay to feel mad and sad because I was, and I never felt those feelings before, but those are normal feelings to feel when you're in a situation like that. And I can remember my sister saying, you are still going to have these big dreams for her. They're just going to look a little bit different. And so that kind of helps me to reframe how I was thinking about things, not that life was going to just be dark and sad all the time, but that life could still be good. It would just look a little bit different than the way I had always envisioned it looking. I think as far as what's not helpful, it was not helpful for me when people would try to compare their situation with mine when it just felt so different. Like if someone would hear that she was having a hard time nursing, they would say, oh, well, my baby had a tongue tie and we did this and that helped it, just fixed it right up. And to me, that just felt so different than what I was experiencing because it was so different. And I think it came from a good place, a well-meaning place, but for me, it just wasn't very helpful. And what I was feeling at that time felt so much heavier than that and so much bigger than that.
So I can add there, as you're thinking about what your conversations look like with a mom who's going through really hard places or parents who are going through really hard places with their kids, it's natural to want to identify with them in those experiences. And so you automatically go to something that is similar that you could relate to. But I think what's helpful, what Rachel's example brings out is that it can feel dismissive of how challenging the whole picture is for us. And again, a lot of times those walking alongside us don't see all the details and all the hard. You just get a quicker snapshot of what life is like, which may or may not include the full depth of what we've been through those last days and weeks. And so just being kind in your comparative language, instead of trying to find an example in your own life that matches that in the life of a parent who's has a child with special needs, maybe think of identifying in the emotions, how hard those early days are, and finding common footing, not in experience versus experience, but in identifying and encouraging them in those long days of intense care. and let them bring out the examples that they really want to share and want you to understand more of, and then ask questions about that instead of maybe the comparative language. Let's see, how about Susie? What would you add to that?
I think I quickly learned just that we were in a place where we needed a lot of grace, but that we had to give a lot of grace to other people. I think, people do, like we're saying, they mean well, but I think that they can also say some really hard things, not meaning to. So I think just reminding myself that we're all doing the best that we can, and just being gracious to others was helpful to me. For me, people would tell me that God wouldn't give me more than I could handle. And I felt like that simply wasn't true, because I could not handle this. I felt like this was just way too much to bear. And so that was not helpful for me. Or the other one was that God gives special children to special parents. And I also felt that that wasn't true, because I didn't feel very special. And I knew just how desperately I was struggling on the inside. And so I just felt like a fraud and a failure. Like, I'm not living up to this special status. And so the things that I really felt were the most helpful were just the people who were willing to enter in my grief and just validate that this is hard and I am so sorry. I think that just willing to cry with me, that really was the most helpful. And I had one of my dearest friends send me the passage from John 9, where the disciples are walking along and they're asking Jesus, why was this man born blind? And, was it his sin? Was it his parents' sin? And Jesus said, no, it happened so that the works of God might be displayed in his life. And that was just a huge, a truth that Joe and I clung to so desperately. And it really just changed our perspective. It wasn't like an overnight thing, but it just gave us, like, God is going to use Sadie for his glory. And it might not be the way that we would have chosen or hoped for. But just, we knew him to be faithful. We knew that we could trust him with 1,000 fears and uncertainties that her future and our future held.
Perfect. I'm going to let Amanda go next, and then I'm going to tie these thoughts together. Amanda, what would you add?
Something that you had mentioned, Ashley, that I think I would just suggest asking questions versus making any sort of statements at a basic level, because every diagnosis is different. And even within a diagnosis, each individual has their own version of that diagnosis, and every parent's experience is a little different. But one question I would discourage that comes into play with autism, the diagnosis is autism spectrum, and I would discourage the question of, where are they on the spectrum? I remember being asked that and I was like, I don't even know. But that's beside the point. But, are they high functioning or low functioning? And these questions are troublesome for a few reasons. One, just the term spectrum is complex because it's not just one spectrum, it's multiple spectrums. An individual may, be at one point on the language spectrum and somewhere different on the social awareness, and so on and so forth with the different categories. And then this question is often used to determine just how big of a situation are we dealing with here. Trust me, no matter the person's autism, no matter how it looks, there are always hard things that hand you loss and isolation and grief and fear and all the things. And then thirdly, I would say, probably most importantly, it's, if you think about it, it denotes like a placement of value on this individual and on this person, which is something we definitely want to avoid. But going back to asking questions, like Ashley was saying, about how the person is feeling versus like comparing, specific scenarios that you've experienced, asking how the person is doing, how is the child doing, what are next steps, and however that person is feeling, validating that, I mean, I do tend to like for people to relate with, I guess it's more on the feeling side. I didn't realize that till hearing you say that. But knowing that someone else has gone through this and validating, that, just sympathizing that I'm having to go through that as well too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I can add just a little bit there as you think back to what each of these ladies have said. It mattered when people entered in and let them experience emotions. A lot of times we're holding things together and we are, maybe not necessarily intentionally wanting to make it look easy, but a lot of parents in the special needs world make this process look easy. You get really good at navigating and explaining and maybe ignoring things that hurt, brushing that off, or just things that catch you by surprise that send you back into grief. You get really good at navigating all of that because it's very normal. But behind that are feelings and emotions that do catch every mom and dad by surprise from time to time in this parenting process. And I think the friends, what you're hearing a little bit in these relationships are the friends that let you feel the feelings, the friends that let you be you, that don't require you to have it all together or put up the front that it is all nice and neat and figured out and we're going to be just fine, but are willing to enter into the messiness with you, are the ones that are treasures. If you're wanting to be that person, I think there is a lot to be said for being a normal friend in the sense that everything doesn't have to relate to and about disability in our lives. It's okay to ask us what we watched on the news or, what our favorite show is on Netflix or what our kids really love or what thing worked really well this week or, what's been your favorite dish to eat lately. I mean, there's so many normal things that you can ask when you feel like you're at that awkward moment of not knowing how to respond. So I would encourage you to default to normal conversation like you would with any other family, asking to get to know all parts of their lives and all parts of their kids, not just the parts impacted by disability. But when you do go into the disability side, my last thought here banks on Amanda's thought that no parent wants to feel like their child is too much. And every parent with kids with disabilities knows that feeling when someone asks a question to try to figure out how much are we getting into by having a relationship with you or inviting you to our church or to our event or whatever. What kind of care do you need? What resonates in our hearts at that moment is not the genuine, I really want to give you the supports you need, but what you often hear is, are we going to be too much? Is this going to be one of those times where we're going to be rejected? Because if I open up the honest answer, it might be more than they're ready to hear or want to enter into. So I really, really, really would encourage you to stay away from those questions. Just like Amanda said, of where does your child fall on the spectrum, or how significant of an intellectual disability does your child have, or any question that kind of compares where they are to other children. That's usually not your entry level or even mid-level conversation, easy topic. Save that for when you're really walking with the family and they're opening those curtains and letting you in on how hard it is for them to process that, or what their fears are, or what they're hoping that you might be able to help them with at that point. But let them guide you would be my encouragement there. Okay, next question I want to ask is about the diagnosis. Once you all receive the actual diagnosis, I think this is really important for those wanting to love well. Once you got the diagnosis, did it leave you with tremendous peace, or was it just the beginning of more details that you didn't know? And I'm going to start with Amanda on this one.
For me, it was certainly the beginning of more details and unknown. Is Anderson going to have anyone who is his friend, who loves him outside of our family? Is he going to have what he needs when we are gone? To what extent is he going to learn and grow? It felt very unsafe to make any assumptions or determinations, going back to, it's good that you called it early. Well, what does that mean for Anderson? That didn't have a lot of meaning for me. And then, I quickly realized that, we had therapists coming in our lives, speech, occupational, ABA, and they each had training in their specific areas. But the child is getting therapy, but you are also learning to be a therapist in the therapy sessions. And so this awakening moment of like, I have to be all these therapists at one time, or in one person at all times. And that was a little overwhelming. I've seen Ashley as a rock star. She could be any therapist she ever wanted to be. It's amazing. But it is kind of what's expected of you as a parent.
I really appreciate you bringing that side out, because I think, again, parents can make it look easy, but when you're starting, you get a diagnosis, you don't know the train tracks or the road or the territory any better than the person necessarily beside you. Kids on the spectrum, to come to Amanda's example, are all different. And you really do, as a parent, become those therapists in working on those skills in between visits, and that becomes a significant part of your life. I have lovingly said I never knew what great friends I would get from the therapy world. Those were not necessarily the people that I ever thought would overlap our lives with great intensity, but they're some of the people you spend the most time with on a weekly basis. I have more conversations with them than I do often friends from, a long time ago. And so that is a big eye opener. So Amanda, really well said. Susie, what about you? What would you add?
So when we had been searching for so long for the diagnosis, so I think that when we finally got the diagnosis, it was really just shocking and confusing, because Sadie doesn't present. It's totally what you're saying. I mean, I love that. It's just, she wasn't presenting like a typical Rett girl. And so we had finally like made it into the club, like a club of this diagnosis, but then we didn't even fit within that club. So that was just really hard. And just thinking about the fear of the regression and the unknown and what was that going to look like. And so I think just, even though we had wanted an answer for so long, we really did not want that answer. We really thought of all the ones that we had been tested for. We thought, one, surely it's not that, because she didn't present that way. And then we just did not want that one, because it was just so scary, just for the future and what it meant for Sadie. So I think there was a relief in finally having an answer, but then it just kind of transitioned into this overwhelming thoughts of how are we going to do this? And we'd already been plugging away for 5 years. So how are we going to keep going? I think that is
really well said. Really well said. Big themes there. Who are our people? I think all of us would shake our heads at times. We've said, who are our people? Who get this? Who understand where we are? And there's an assumption out there that you'll find your people in your disability diagnosis. But as Susie just said, and Amanda has alluded to this, Rachel's going to allude to this, there's a big difference in one kid on the spectrum and the next, and one Rett girl to the next. And then Rachel, who has a diagnosis, a genetic disorder that, there's only a handful of people in the world who have that diagnosis. So community doesn't always come through the people that have the same diagnosis type. And I also think there's this misnomer that the diagnosis solves everything, that it just gives this huge sense of peace. Such a combination. I don't want to steal from Rachel here. Rachel, you add to this. What would you say? Peace or more unknown?
A little of both. I think we had also been searching for almost 3 years, and it's like we kept finding these little places where we were trying to hang our hats, and then they would come and say, well, no, that's not it. Okay, well, no, that can't be it either. And so when we finally found out what it was helpful. It did bring a sense of peace in that it was just an answer. Now, she was one of 90 in the world, so there was hardly any information on it, but it did give me something to type into Google. Like I had something to, like, a name to look for. And so I think the one thing it did for us is it gave us better questions to ask the doctors because, there are specific things that those 90 people did have that I could talk to the doctors about. But again, with Emma Kate's diagnosis, there's a huge spectrum with that too. And I was reading about kids with her diagnosis that were going to college, and she's 13, nonverbal, in diapers with a feeding tube. And so that's not necessarily helpful either. So yeah, it was a mix. It helped a little, and it also didn't.
And hopefully that encourages parents out there who are thinking, I thought this was supposed to solve the problems, quote unquote, that we get the diagnosis and we'll know what to do. All of this, I always say, comes back to the heart of we really want to solve problems. We really, really want answers and something to do next that will make it better. And I think that's a hard wiring for before the fall, or a hard wiring for a longing for heaven where things will be perfect. I think we're created with that sense that this is not the way that it's supposed to be. And so we're constantly working towards wanting to make that either black or white, but not live in the gray. Well, for all of us and anyone who's watching tonight who has a kid with disability, welcome to the world of gray. It's a little of both all the time. It's never black and white. There's always gray. And to have to walk in it and live in it, and to know that you can't solve it, you can't fix it. The diagnosis is just the starting point for the parent journey of realizing how much work God's going to do in you to get to the place where you're okay with not being able to solve it, fix it, sometimes make it better, sometimes change things. Sometimes you can, but every kid is different and every diagnosis is different. And so just remembering those longings are right. I really believe those longings are for heaven and or for how we were supposed to be created before the fall are perfect, but we can't always solve it with the diagnosis. So to that end, during this season, a lot of what y'all are not hearing them reflect on that I got the privilege to reflect on while we were kind of talking through their lives weeks ago is all the things that happen next. So it's a season of therapists and bills and new realities, a lot of unknowns, and a whole list of things to do. So I want you guys to share, what would you encourage people to do who want to love families well? What was helpful to you in these early days, and maybe what wasn't helpful? And Rachel, I'm going to go back to you first on this one.
I would say, hands down, respite was the thing that we needed the most. I think you can just easily lose yourself in therapy and diapers and home health equipment and just start to feel like you're drowning. And also kind of like disconnect from your spouse along the way. And so I think respite for both parents together, where you're not only taking care of the child with special needs, but also their siblings, because you got to take them all if the parents are going to have a break. I can't think of anything that has helped us more than that, Trey and I. For single moms, a break for her where she can go do normal mom things like get her hair cut or go get a pedicure, just something to make her feel like a little more human, is such a treat. And it is such a reset. I mean, it doesn't have to be long. It could be 3 hours that she can run away and have a little time to herself. And I would just always come back feeling like a new person, always. So, and I know that Ashley was asking me what that might look like for a medically fragile child, and it is hard. I think you know the people that you can trust to care for your child, whatever that looks like. For me, I knew the people who were really interested in genuinely wanting to care for her and learn how to care for her. And so I knew who I could train to do her feedings and her medicine and things like that. But also, if you're not to that point where you are ready to train for all those things, maybe you could just escape for 3 hours between 2 feeds. But we did have people in our lives that we learned to trust, and we would just give them like a little bit at a time where, maybe they're just in there changing diapers, and then maybe the next time we're just showing them the feeding tube, and then the next time we're standing right there next to them when they're doing the feeding tube. And then, 3 hours might turn into us leaving for 6. But hopefully you can find those people that you trust to really take care of your child, especially if they're medically fragile. But really that could go for anything. It could go for a child that's autistic, learning those tendencies and how to deal with that. So at respite, that's the biggie for me.
Perfect. And I would add, in the scope of ideas, a lot of our parents who have kids with problem behavior are kind of in the same place as those that are medically fragile, in the sense that you feel like that you've got to have some skills to be able to leave them and things go well. So if you're wanting to help a parent and they're not there yet, another idea for the toolbox is consider giving them respite at home. A lot can happen when you let mom go lock the door and take a nap, and you're still there. You can hear, screams, or if somebody escapes, or if they really need you, they can bang on the door. It can really be a good stepping stone towards fading yourself out. It also might be, I'm going to throw this out there for the moms and the dads who like to be busy for respite. It might be that you want to clean a closet, or you want to go tackle the garage, and you want to see some progress, because caring for kids with special needs is very routine. You do the same things over and over again, and you often don't see a lot of progress. So I can remember wanting to plant flowers and wanting to clean closet, and just see some task that was done. And I could often do that by having a locked door, or having them inside while I'm outside, while learning to fade myself and build those skills. So this is another idea there. Let's see. How about Amanda? What can you add?
I heard an idea recent about, it's very common for there to be just a part of the routine life of going to appointments and therapy sessions and things. And so the idea of rethinking when and where you hang out, ask if you can hang out with them in the waiting room. Well, it's just a part of life, and they're just sitting in there waiting. And so it's a great opportunity. Use that time to meet them and hang out with them there. And another thing that I realized in our experience was it was always easier for folks to come and visit us in our home versus us going to their house. Someone else's house was always very stimulating for Anderson, and so one of us would always have to be following him around and would not be able to engage. But in our home, he was, everything was familiar, accustomed, and so both we and him would be able to engage more. And we, there's nothing I want more than for my child to be engaged in relationships with people, for sure.
It's perfect. I thought Amanda's idea was brilliant on having people come and sit in the visit with you in the waiting room. If you are trying to love someone who has their first child with a diagnosis, they don't have a second, then they're going to therapies, they're sitting in a waiting room. And it is perfect time to bring a cup of coffee. Of course, this is COVID, before COVID and all the things, but at some point, pick up that cup of coffee and go hang out and have that visit, because childcare is provided. Then it's really a good time to visit. Susie, what would you add?
I think, yeah, just looking back at those first years, I think they were really dark. And I think one of the greatest ways we were sustained was just through the body of Christ and friends who were willing to pursue me when I wasn't pursuable. I had friends who would set up kind of like a weekly schedule. They would come by and take all three of the kids out so that I could rest. I actually would be in my bed asleep, not cleaning out a closet. That would be like, get me to the bed. But they would do that. And it was a sacrifice for them. They had little kids of their own. And so it really was the hands and feet of Jesus to us. We had friends who would, we had our minivan and our house cleaned on numerous occasions. There would be just encouraging notes in the mail. We had money show up in the mail, $100 to pay for the $80 seizure medicine that we needed help with. I mean, it was just all these unexpected ways that the Lord, just little things, but they were huge to us. And we also, just with the respite, we had a lady from church who was my Bible study leader, and she just saw that we were exhausted and she knew we needed a break. And so she was determined to pursue us, and she wasn't afraid to get in the mess and to get dirty. And so her and her husband started having the kids over, and then they would take Sadie one night a week, and they would take her to school the next day. And we just could rest, and we could do normal things with our other two kids. And just we could feel kind of normal again. And Joe's parents also have done that, and they continue to do that with Sadie. One night a week she gets to go to Papa and Gammy's house, and it just is a huge relief, just to be able to breathe and to not be on. And so that has just been a really tangible way that I have seen God's love for us. And I think just helps me to believe like he is real and he is good and he's in this with us. And I can see that through these tangible acts of love, just through his body. So I would just encourage people to just get in there, and it can be uncomfortable, but it's just so worth it.
Really, really good, encouraging. And if you watched our webinar last month, you heard me say this, but it's worth repeating here. If you know and love people who have kids with disabilities and you really want to help and you have the relationship, don't ask, just show up. Don't ask, do you need a meal? Just pick them one. Don't ask, can I come sit with you and bring you a cup of coffee and visit in the waiting room? Just show up with the coffee. Don't ask, do you need money for seizure medicines? Just put the check in the mail. I think it's easy for us to refuse. And again, going back to that, no, we've got it. It's all good. But that's just our natural proclivity to want to say to the world, we got this. But for those who walk with us closely, we don't got this most of the time. I mean, and it's just such a kind providence from God when God uses people to meet those tangible needs in ways that you can't refuse. It will make you cry every time. So if you're considering doing something, do it. Don't ask, just do it. Do it with, love and care and good intentions, but don't ask them, because often the answer will be no. Okay, I'm moving us to the lightning round. It's first time on a lightning round. So I'm going to talk. All I'm going to do is ask questions, and we're going to go in the same order. I'm not going to pull out principles here. I want you to hear them. And I want us to be able to cover a lot of ground in these few questions. So we're going to go in this order, and I'll remind you in case we get stuck somewhere. But Rachel, you're going to go first, then Amanda, and then Susie on each one of these. And we'll just let you go one to the next. Okay, so first question. What is the most important thing that you want people to know about your child? Rachel?
I just want people to know that she is created in God's image, and she might look more broken than we do. We are all broken, and we can just cover it up a little bit better than she can.
Amanda?
I would, that all behavior is communicating something. Yeah.
And I would say that she's in there, and that she may be trapped by this disability, but she's completely aware, and so engage her.
Awesome. Okay, what do you all want most for your child at church? Rachel?
I want her to be wanted at church, to not ever be treated as a burden.
Wanted, not treated as a burden. I love that. Amanda?
Mine is similar. In church, we think about relationship to God and relationship to man. And I think for us, is relationship to man. His relationship with Christ is definitely covered in our church, and it's great. The opportunities and provisions and everything. But I really want for him to have friendships that are not just sort of pop-in visits, but are, growing and developing. He's getting to know a person, vice versa. And, I want him to be able to have an answer to the question, who is your best friend?
Susie?
I want for church just to know that Sadie is valuable, and that she offers value, and that without Sadie and other kids like her, that just the body of Christ would not be complete without these kiddos.
I can't sit on my hands on this one. So everybody listening, wanted, loved, that's, we want our kids to be wanted, not just there, but wanted and loved and seen as valuable and seen as needed. And then I continue to say in every webcast, the heart of every parent is that our kids would have friends, meaningful friendships, and that they would be able to answer that question that Amanda asked when you say, who's your best friend? They have an answer for that. That says a lot about church body life and who loves well. Okay, I'm really not going to say anything on this round. The next one is, what one piece of wisdom for friends who love someone with a child with a disability, but maybe they have typically developing kids and life is inevitably moving in different directions. What's the one piece of wisdom you would give to those friends? So I said that kind of fast. We all have friends who, aren't in our season and stage of life, who didn't have kids with disabilities. So what's the one thing we should have told people back then? Rachel?
Life might look different for us, but we need our community. We need our friends.
Perfect. Amanda?
I think I had a bigger answer to this than I should, but so I'm
okay.
One of them.
You can do them all. You had good things. Go for it.
So, it's very natural for kids when they see something that's different to look at it, ask questions about it, talk about it. And I mean, I totally get this, that, it's very common for us as adults to want to kind of shut that down and tell them to stop looking and things like that. And I would encourage you to, instead of that, to answer the kid's question, answer the child's questions. And instead of having the child to stop staring, go with the child and say hi. Introduce yourself if you don't know them, start playing with them and saying hi if you do. And, sometimes if you've not encountered you don't know the answers to the questions, find those out when the opportunity comes up from the adult, and you can teach your child those things that you learned those answers that you found out. And then a very common experience that I hear about a lot is to not be invited to birthdays. And I know that may seem trivial, but it's actually a big deal. And it's a great source of pain that I hear about. And even stories of inviting friends and no one comes. And the question that Ashley has asked about, your life goes in different directions. That's a great way to, narrow that gap and overlap those paths. And it can prevent that hurt, mend that hurt. So, like when your child has sort of an invite list, take a look at that list and see if there's anyone, if there's anyone that's different. If there's not, and encourage them to enfold someone who's different, and talk to them about why it's important to diversify the friendships and community in our life. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Perfect. Susie?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with Amanda. Just don't stop inviting to the birthday parties and the graduations and the weddings. I think remembering that when your child is hitting these major milestones, that your friend whose child has a diagnosis is just often grieving just those major, just grieving the broken dreams that we had for our kids and just the what could have been. So I think, on that first day of middle school or high school graduation, just to send a text and say, I know this day might be hard for you and I'm thinking of you. Just keep pursuing.
And I would add to that too, I wish that I had known to say, give grace when I don't show up. Don't quit pursuing. And in turn, I think I would have told myself, don't feel guilty when you don't show up, and keep pursuing them. Don't assume that they've, maybe written you off because your path has gone a different way. But it makes everybody uncomfortable when you don't really know how to do the dance. And in those early years, you don't know what you can and can't do till you give it a try. Well, that was a big fail. But I think showing up on both sides, continuing to do it and giving yourselves that permission that you can be real and okay with each other and say, that didn't work, or I'm not coming this time, but that doesn't count me out forever. I would have helped friends understand that. And I would have given myself the grace and space in my heart to not feel like a failure when I couldn't keep up. Okay. And then what is the one thing you've needed the most during this season with parenting a special needs child? Can y'all boil it down to one thing or one or two things? Rachel?
Respite, yes. And thankfully, so many of our local churches provide that. So
Respite.
is the sweetest thing
Yes.
people could do for us.
That's great. I think, I think what Rachel pulls out in having a child that is medically fragile and just requires a lot of care is the relentlessness of this. It's not just a small season, but it is day in and day out. We do it with a glad, cheerful heart. That doesn't mean we don't get tired. And again, not feeling guilty that that's where we are, but just being able to say it is really nice to get a break. I appreciate that a lot in honesty, Rachel. Amanda, what would you add?
Yeah, definitely friendship. We were in a new area anyway, and so that might have taken longer because of the diagnosis or our situation. It might have taken longer to get those friendships than typically, but the Lord has generously provided over the past couple of years. I just want to give this example to to show ideas. The Lord has really provided in our lives just about friendships that they would do just about anything for us. With them, I know I can push through my fears of inconveniencing, like you were alluding to, Ashley, and tell them when I really need help, whether it's conversation or hands-on, and they will drop what they're doing if at all possible and show up. And I know that when I call to share about something I'm struggling with emotionally or spiritually or whatever, that they are going to show empathy and they're going to show me Jesus. They are going to testify to Jesus's work in their lives. And they're going to remind me of the goodness and faithfulness that he has shown me in my life. And I know sometimes that those things can be hard to hear, but I don't know if it's because I know their love and friendship for me and my family, or I just really admire them anyway. I want to hear anything they have to say about anything. But yeah, just folks that just these great friends that the Lord has given us that have made it very known that they are with us and for us, for sure.
I love that. Susie?
I just was going to say rest is what the one thing for me is rest.
Rest. Okay, last one in the lightning round. Give us one creative idea for how other people can love the siblings well. So we have two moms here with oldest. Two with oldest. I had to double check myself. Two with oldest children who have the diagnosis of a disability, and then Susie has her youngest. So, what tips we got here for loving the siblings well? Rachel. Perfect. Amanda.
I would say just to make sure you're engaging them both. Like you were saying earlier, Ashley, thinking back to talking about things outside of just this special needs life, asking about and engaging the sibling as well. I did hear one mom mention something about a lot of their therapy is in home. And so when people have come over to hang out with the siblings because like I said earlier, it's not just the child with needs getting therapy, you're learning in the therapy sessions too. And so that freed up the mom to, do the learning and everything.
Perfect. Susie?
Just to take the siblings out on dates, just take them to do something that they enjoy doing, whether it's get ice cream, go to a park, take them swimming, just get them out, let them have a break as well, because they need one too.
And I would add, at church on Sundays, do make sure you're engaging the siblings just as much as your kids with disabilities. I think on the one hand, as the director of this ministry, I'm always saying, get down and say hi and interact and engage with our kids with disabilities. That goes so far. It means so much. But I also find myself wanting to say, but don't forget to do that with their siblings. That it means a lot to them too to get a little extra attention. And all of us as parents know siblings can get jealous of therapies, they can get jealous of therapists, they can get jealous of any amount of extra time and attention that someone is getting that everyone else is not, and may not fully be at that place of understanding why. So love well. Last tip here, and then last question is, in our own life, someone who's loved us really well has sent my boys mail. It has been like one of the highlights of 2020 with this shutdown. One of the elders in our church who has just taken an interest in our boys, and they each get their own thing. And he's very, very routine about it, but there's not real rhythm to it. So there's just that excitement when they get something from him that's for them. And so just thinking about really ordinary ways that you can engage. Sometimes it's simply a picture of something they love that he found and stuck in the mail for them. And it doesn't have to be even a handwritten note to make that work. Okay, last question here for the night is I wanted to talk just the last few minutes on relationships. because relationships really do change when disability impacts life. Inevitably, as I said earlier, you become friends with a therapist in a community who is walking through this similar diagnoses. And sometimes you end up with a lot of friends who aren't believers as a result of that, which is really neat. It's really a blessing to get to share hope and why we believe in Jesus with a community where largely people with disabilities don't go to church because they're too much or their needs aren't met. And so there's a great opportunity there, but it changes a lot of our other relationships. And so I want you to reflect a little bit on what you've learned that you need in relationships as a mom with special needs kids. And so for those out there who are listening and want to be better friends, similar theme, what advice would you give on, again, giving that space, but also love and time, listening well, all the things that we've kind of talked about. Final tips. And I'm going to call on Susie first.
So I think just looking back, just wanting to be seen and not forgotten as we're just kind of left in the chaos and we're not as spontaneous as we used to be, or we do have to decline a lot of things, and it seems like you can get forgotten. So I think just having friends persist, like I said earlier, especially in the beginning, but also as the years keep going, and you mentioned this, Ashley, but just it is relentless. It doesn't let up and it keeps on going. So just having people in your life who are willing to get in there with you. And just for people to remember that grief does come in waves. And so the first day of school can trigger you. You can see a little girl at church in the 5th grade talking to her friends, and it can trigger you. And just to be okay with being uncomfortable. I think I'd heard Steph Kubach say one time that the more comfortable you get with being uncomfortable, the more comfortable you become. And so I just tell myself that even as I reach out to those who are different than me or who are going through loss, or, life is hard. And so I can even say, oh, am I saying the right thing, or am I doing the right thing? And I even know better. And so just to remind myself, just to risk it and to just go for it. And I think really if we would just take our eyes off of ourselves, that we really could just allow Christ who's in us to love through us. And I think we all would experience just the richness of community that God has for us. And oftentimes I'm too, worried about my own self. And so I think just to focus your eyes on Christ and allow him to love through you.
Perfect. Amanda?
I would encourage you to anyone to be gracious and understanding, affirming when a parent is opening up about their pain and fears. Like Susie was saying, it ebbs and flows, but it does so frequently. And to recognize that this isn't an indication of lack of faith or that you're not taking your refuge in Christ. To watch your child experience loss of typical life opportunities, to be stared at, laughed at, excluded, seen as a burden and abused, it's hard. But like you said, Susie, life is hard and we all experience hard things. And so I would say also on the flip side, I want to encourage you that I still want to be there for you and what is hard in your life. And because I know I had a conversation with a mom one time who is her son is very talkative and he says some of the funniest things, but she was sharing with me about how sometimes it just feels like too much. And my son Anderson at the time was not conversational at all. And she felt bad when she was sharing that. And I was like, please don't feel bad. We all have our burdens that we're bearing, and I want to be a friend. As much as I need a friend, I want to be a friend too. And I'll add to that I also want to be a part of celebrating your joys. There are milestones and momentous events that I want to be a part of. And yes, I'll probably be sad and I'll have to process the fact that we aren't there. but I want to go to your events. I want to share those joys the same way you do with us, and in the small things that are big things. I want to be a part of all of that as well. Yeah. But honestly, for me, the overarching thing is when you love my child, you are loving me. Because as it's already been said multiple times, there's nothing I want more is for my child to be loved. I want him to know the love and hope and peace and refuge of Jesus Christ, who is going to be there through all the hard stuff that's inevitable, and to cling to him, and to also be loved by those around them.
Really well said. Don't forget that. To love our kids is to love us. Rachel, what can you add?
Okay, I just have a few little quick thoughts, little bullet points, but I really appreciate when the people that are closest to us are sensitive to the dailiness of our lives, and what that actually looks like, and are patient with us when we have to say no to certain things. We just reached a point with Emma Kate where it's like she's too big for like a little changing table in a public bathroom. So we're just like in this place where it's like, what do we do? I mean, that's a big thing, changing a diaper in a public place. We haven't figured that out yet. And so certain things are just really hard for us. I loved what Amanda said. It is so much easier to hang out in our house with her things, where I don't feel like I'm just on the edge of my seat trying to make sure she doesn't get hurt or get into anything that she's not supposed to. In the beginning, this is switching gears, but in the beginning, I'm thinking back to when she was born and I was in the hospital with her for weeks. I needed space. I really did. But I didn't stay there. And so now I need, we need community, we need our friendships. And so it is a fine line of where that person you love is in their grief. And we all need space to process, but don't let them stay there. Don't let them feel like they're alone. I think it's so important to teach your children about kids like our children, just so that there's less of the staring and there's more of a conversation. And I love when I see kids run up to Emma Kate and talk to her. They're not talking at her, but they're talking to her. And even though they know she can't talk back, they're acknowledging that she is there and that there's a person inside that little body. And so I just, like Amanda said, when you love my baby, you are loving me. That's the sweetest thing you can do for me. Lastly, I would say, just looking back, what I remember more than anything is just the people who gave me their gift of presence. They showed up. They flew to Boston with me. They sat in the NICU with me, and they didn't have to say a word, but they cried when I cried, and they laughed when I laughed. And that's just a gift that I will never forget. And I learned how to be a better friend by watching my friends be friends to me.
I love that. Okay, before I wrap things up, we did get a few questions, and I know that we have run a little longer. So what I'm going to do, a couple of these questions we've answered in our in some of the tips and tricks that we have shared. A couple of them we haven't. So I'm going to read these two questions, and I'm going to try to give some short answers. Ladies, if you have any thoughts, feel free to unmute. If I see you unmute, I'll know that you might want to share too. And then we will wrap it up and let everyone enjoy their evening. The first question is a good one. As a mom with a disability, how do you help others understand that you can still do ministry too? So I'm going to give some quick thoughts there. This mom is probably a lot like me as a mom. I love ministry, and the tensions of being overwhelmed with kids and situational issues related to disability. And it isn't uncommon to be told or for people to think and assume that you can't do more or serve more. Or even be told that you can't serve at all because we know you have too many things going on. All well-intentioned, but those decisions can be made in conversations around you and about you. And you could be really longing to serve the body of Christ with your gifts, lead a Bible study, help with set up or clean up, whatever that looks like. And so one of the things that comes to my mind is that I wish that I had been a little more honest in the early years with people about how I'm wired, my personality, my longings, how I receive rest. I like to occupy myself in different ways, and that can become respite to me. Ministry is very life-giving. It gives me energy, creative ideas. I enjoy being with people. It, in a lot of ways, makes me sharper as a mom. And I wasn't very confident in that part of me in those early years. Was it still there? Could I still do it? Could I juggle? Were they right? Could I really not do it? And some of that is just time and space to grow and develop and to figure out where God's called you and what you really need to be doing. But if you have a longing to serve, my encouragement is to get you serving. I want all of us to realize what we have to offer to the body of Christ. Every person, including our kids, can serve the church in the way that they have been called and gifted to serve. So my encouragement would be to be a little bit more open maybe about what energizes you and rejuvenates you, and maybe even have those conversations about what fears you may have of being limited in ministry and why that is something that you know makes you worried. Ladies, any thoughts there that you could add? Okay. So next question is, I'm interested in reaching out to families in our community who have family members with disabilities. So there, I think, is just how do you reach out when you don't know names? I think it's the same principle as if you're reaching out to your neighbor who lives across the street that you've suddenly met because now you walk because of COVID being shut down and you never knew them before. And so it starts with a hello and a name, a person, and a real life someone that you're trying to build a relationship with. I would encourage you to do all the normal things that you would do with anyone. You have those initial conversations and you ask to swap phone numbers so you can send a text. You send a couple of texts, maybe you drop an encouraging note off, maybe you think about them and something that relates to the conversation and you send that by text. You slowly build the relationship with people on the basis of things that are not just disability related. When it happens to collide with disability, then you let them open the door, lead you, guide you, or you offer to encourage. But I would say do the normal things that you would with anyone that you were trying to get to know flat-footed, meaning you don't know them ahead. And a lot of that is just time spent with people equals relationships. So if you really want to invest in others, you do have to make that effort to extend the time, be present, show up, whether that's in person or text or phone call or an email or a happy that's dropped off at the door, a cup of coffee on a cold morning. There's so many ways to show you care that won't be rejected and that will build a relationship over time. How do you find the balance between addressing diagnoses or a perceived diagnosis and handling something else that's going on in life, whether that is a spiritual issue or maybe just another life event or struggle or milestone? So fast tips here. I think we have this pie in the sky idea that God will only throw one thing at us at one time. And then when we get 10 things thrown at once, we're like, oh, juggle, juggle, juggle. And for parents, especially with kids with disabilities, I see the juggle happen a lot. It seems like things happen in bursts. It won't just be one event. It will be several. As a matter of fact, we have an ongoing joke in our house that, when one thing happens, what else is going to be coming? And so one thing that I've learned over time is that you don't have to do all things at once. Sometimes it is okay to say, right now for this season, we can't focus on this specific therapy or hitting this next goal. Sometimes it's more important to look at the bigger goals, whether that's in marriage or whether that is, a walk with the Lord. I'm running around driving everybody to all these things and there's nothing left of me to give. I'm not going to be the wife and the mom that I need to be to support the family. And so recognizing your own needs in the picture, I will say to parents watching, it's so common for us to deny our own needs to meet the needs of others because we become really good caregivers. And so you even have guilt when you start to say, well, what is it that I should focus on? And what will that restrict someone else from doing that they really need? But I've learned that all things balance out over time. And sometimes focusing on one thing at a time is the best thing that you can do for your family and your kids. And so if it is something that has really risen to the surface that needs your attention, give yourself permission to say that these things that don't have to happen this week, it's okay not to focus on them. And in our world, that really would be therapies or extras that we're trying to provide our kids so that they're exposed to or have social opportunities or a little bit more going on in their worlds. It's okay every now and then in every family for someone else's needs to be put first. That's part of learning to sacrifice for one another. And if we're not demonstrating that in our families and our kids think that life revolves around them, whether they're typically developing or have special needs, that's not something that's going to serve them well in the long run. So remember that families sacrifice, self-sacrifice to each other. And at times there are going to be needs that are even greater than special needs. And that is okay. Feel no guilt about that. Just know that when that season comes back, you then start right back where you left off. And I promise there will be next steps from there. Okay, last one. Let's see, any resources on how to talk to other siblings and also tips and tricks to spend time with the other daughters when disability takes so much time. I really want to focus on, okay, resources. I want you to, we can send some links on this, but we have some resources on our website. So go to engagingdisability.org, find resources and look there. And then the part about spending time with your other children. So some fast thoughts. I think it's really important to make individual time for the kids that don't have the disability. They intuitively know mom and dad do more or give more or have to respond more to the most intense need in the household. That's something not taught, it's caught. It doesn't take very long to know that where your time and money go and your driving around goes is, what's most important. And that can feel very, it can really leave the siblings shaky. And who am I? And do you love me as much as you love them? And so I think being strategic about where you spend your one-on-one time. One thing I've learned is high quality time is far better than lots of low quality time. So if I really want to connect with another child, it might be that I can do that in, a 5-10 minute conversation on what they love that day that fills their tank up. It might not even be, taking them to go get a donut. It might be. But I think knowing your children and knowing what they need from you, some need more encouragement, some need to use their words and get all that out. They need you to listen. Some of them need a hug. Some of them need you to do stuff with them and need you to go do it side by side and, have one that loves to do anything I'm doing. And so none of my others like to do that, whether it's cleaning or laundry or anything in between. He's happy to do it with me. And so that becomes our one-on-one time. And then I, in turn, try to find things that I will choose to do that he wants to do, right? So something that he loves that I want to do in his world, the same as he does for me. And I will be intentional about that and say, how you helped me and, you showed up and helped me do these things. Well, I want to help and show up for you. And sometimes that's just enough to help them know I'm paying attention, they're loved, and everybody matters. One-on-one time is my advice. I think I got one more down here. Let me look. What fruit has the Lord given you through your experience of caregiving that's given you a greater glimpse into to the heart of Christ and more? Okay, so I think on this one, caregiving, it has taught me more about Jesus than I ever thought I would know. When I think about how he cares for his sheep, how he tends everyone, how he goes after the one that's lost, and how he leads them beside streams of living waters and green pastures. And I know that that is not what my world looks like on a normal basis, but that's what I want to give to my kids: still pastures, living waters. And when I realized that Jesus does that for every sheep and that we are his sheep, I find that renewed sense of purpose in doing the same things over and over again with eternal perspective. I also really work to help my whole family learn to care for each other that way. And I often use the sheep imagery around here because kids with disabilities really latch on to tangible images, and barnyard animals are very easy to picture. And so we will talk about how a sheep has gone astray and someone needs more attention, and how isn't it wonderful that Jesus does that for us all the time. He's always there. He's always ready for me. I'm the one that's often not seeking him. So I think watching the suffering and the servant part of our Savior in the Gospels, that he suffered alongside his people, that he served them to the very end, that he laid down his life for us when he didn't have to, that we lay down our lives for our kids, and that maybe we don't think we have to, but we willingly do it, right? And so isn't that what Jesus did? He willingly did it. He didn't have to do it. It wasn't a duty and a drudgery. It was something he wanted to do. And so each time I come to the end of myself, I'm very thankful that Jesus never came to the end of his willingness to lay down his life and to continue to lead us. That's the short answer. I could probably do an essay on that one. Great questions. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight, sharing your lives with us, especially you panelists. Thanks for sharing your families and your hearts and your desire to help others in navigating new diagnoses. And I want to thank everybody who is out there watching and has followed along. Remember that Engaging Disability is here to come alongside your church and your families. We're not just here to have webcasts and talk about things in idea form. So if you're interested in getting started in ministry, or you're wanting to follow up on any of the conversations that were started tonight, or on how we can organically help meet your needs, simply email us at connect@engagingdisability.org, or you can visit our website, which is engagingdisability.org. And ladies, thanks for joining us. We are so glad you're here, and good night to all.